Hello, my name is Kelly Mabel, and this is Kind Mind Academy. And I am here and have the pleasure and honor to introduce Rohini and Angus Ross. Welcome to the room, both of you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having us. It's wonderful to see you and all of your guests.
Yeah. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Hi.
I met the two of you when we were at. I have to tell this little story because I don't know if I've shared. I know I don't think I've shared with either of you, but I was a volunteer and very excited to be, a part of the convention and in the UK. And as people were coming in, it's like seeing. You've been watching people on video, or you watch people on, and you're glued to your screen and you're listening to pods. And I receive Rohini's beautiful writing each week. And I'm standing at the table and the speakers are coming in, and all of a sudden, it's like the movie stars, people that you've seen, but you don't know, and you're able to like reach out and go, it's them. And I had this moment where it's like, oh, they're here. And it is really that way when you've been following someone online for so long and then they're physically in front of you as a real human being.
With
And
arms and legs.
exactly.
Right, not just heads.
Exactly. And supporting the message and carrying love and understanding with you. And so I was really like, wow. And so it is my utmost honor to have you both here. I was participating, some of you in the room might have participated in the beautiful unfolding of the 29-day rewilding experience that you both put on not so long ago. And I had the pleasure of seeing even more coaching and insights and well-being being displayed by the two of you, and how largely what you had to offer impacted those in relationships. For myself, being a single and hearing the message that unfolded in that process was beautiful. And so I just want to say that I like for you to unfold yourselves organically in the room, because I can pick up lots of blogs and read things that you've done. And I just sometimes think that wisdom guides the way. And in this place, I'd love to just turn it over to you to share with some of the people have never heard you before. My students are um, new to the experience of the principles, and possibly new to you without my instigating your name over and over and over again. And then there are people which I would call the originals, or fellows that have been with us for a long time, women and men. And so, yeah, I'll turn the room over to you, and please share in whatever way you'd like your experience, strength, hope, wisdom, and insights.
Oh, well, thank you so much for trusting us with your group and turning it over to us.
Yeah, no, that's lovely.
And so we thought, given what I've seen in terms of the emails, that the big question is, what are the three principles? We thought we would start there.
Yes, you're looking at me. I will kick things off. It's funny. I feel like I have seen other teachers, some of the older guard, as it were, the original teachers, being asked that question. I remember Michael Neal, when we were in LA, talking about someone who was asked that question, who is kind of iconic in this understanding, and was really uncomfortable and floundering. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's funny because now I feel like I've taken up the mantle for the person in our relationship who has to explain the
Yes, you are.
principles. And it was so funny because the other day we were doing a group call with friends of ours. We were doing a teaching, and everybody looked at me to explain the principles. And I generally, the way that I do it is I use an illustration, which is why I have my trusty
I'll get out the way.
with me. But on this particular occasion, they wouldn't let me use the whiteboard. So I found myself being that person. It's like, oh, I don't have my crutch to use. It's like, now what do I do? But I managed to pull it off anyway. But I thought I would start with my particular way that I see the principles, and just to give it a little bit of a background, part of what I do and how I teach is that I'm very fortunate that I get to work at a treatment center a couple of days a week. And in my role there, which is to fly the flag for the principles, in my role there, I'm constantly faced with new residents who know absolutely nothing about this understanding. So as much as possible, I want to try and hit the ground running. And generally, they're there for at least 30 days, but some of them may not be able to afford that. So they might be there for less. So they might even only there be for a week or two. So I want to really make the most impact possible. And I found that this, for me, has been the way to do it, is to do this illustration. So it's kind of like my Pictionary version of the principles. And I even get people that encourage people to sort of shout out, what do you think this means? And what does this represent? But it's been a wonderful journey for me, because over the year, I've had all kinds of feedback from the people that I've been teaching, which has helped me refine how, I show up, how it affects my grounding, and how I talk about the principles. So without further ado, I will give you my illustration. Let's see if we can get one of these pens to work.
Okay.
I love this. I've seen it before. I love this.
Okay, so just make sure that you can all see that, can't you? Yeah. Yeah, there we go.
We're good. Yep.
Okay.
Make sure they can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so because, again, I don't know who my audience is going to be in terms of where they are on the spiritual spectrum. And I have to be respectful of the fact there'll be people there. Some people will be devoutly religious. Some people will be like, kind of take it or leave it. Some people, can be atheists. But I try to be very secular in my approach. So the way that I start, and you'll, I'm sure, be able to guess what this is. Hopefully, if my drawing is good enough, fairly quickly. It's a little bit of, not the greatest one I've ever done, not the greatest atom, but this is an atom with its subatomic particles, the electron, the proton, and the neutron. And where I like to start is I like to talk about the fact, I went to church with my mum as a kid, and I don't advertise this, but I was an altar boy for a while. But there was never anything really tangible that I could really get my teeth into. So give me some science, give me something that I can relate to on that level. And I was always looking for that, but I never heard that in church per se. I mean, I love Christian philosophy, and I really have a strong resonance with it, but when I was going to church with my mom, it's like there was always something that just was lacking for me. So when I came across this, I read this somewhere, that within the atomic structure, with these subatomic particles that make up the atomic structure, that the neutron replicates itself in very specific ways. That there are portions of the scientific community who will say, it's called, that's just one big random accident. And I say, that's just crazy. Where is the logic in that? These neutrons replicate themselves in very specific ways to go on and create all the different unique atoms that go on to create all the unique elements in the periodic table that make up the building blocks of life. You, me, this house, the computer are all made up of these elements. And there's an intelligence behind that. So that's generally where I like to start. And I like to suggest and strongly indicate that there is an intelligence behind life. So for me, I'm going to represent that field with this big half circle, which is a really inadequate way of defining that intelligence. So in defining this intelligence with this half circle, generally people in the audience will start saying, well, you're talking about God. And I say, yeah, you know what? If that's the label that you want to use, I'm talking about God. So we use terms like the intelligence behind life, meta-consciousness, there are all sorts of different ways of pointing in that direction. But as far as the principles are concerned, we're using this term mind. So mind is a term that we use to represent this field. So principle of mind. And then we come into the equation, as I like to say, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And at this point, we're an expansion of this field. We're kind of an expression of this field. But what's interesting about this expression and this expansion, apart from being human, is that we come equipped with our five senses. And with our five senses, we also, which is kind of how we experience the world that we live in. We come with this incredible piece of equipment, our five senses, which we get to experience the world that we live in. But we also come with this other piece of equipment, which we can say, and I can call our rational mind, which I like to often refer to as the super hard drive. So I'm going to flog this message, I'm going to flog these computer metaphors to death here today. But so if you think that we have our five senses, we have this hard drive, that this hard drive also comes with this processing system of thought. And it's through thought is how we generally store away data and experience the world that we live in. So we are constantly, with our five senses, having an awareness of our surroundings, constantly collecting data. And through the system of thought and along with this hard drive, this is where we store our data. So I kind of like the idea of the thought system being analogous with the screenwriting software. So we're constantly creating narratives, constantly gathering together information and storing it away in the hard drive for a rainy day. Now, when you look at the actual biology behind thought, and you look, and I'm going to employ artistic license today because I'm only going to do a few brain cells, few neurons, but we have these brain cells that when you look at a cross-section of the brain, is this giant spaghetti network of wiring, the neural networks, the neural pathways. So if I continue with this theme, that's just basically like as I say, it's kind of like the screenwriting software. This is the software that we use to gather information and store away in the hard drive. Now, Rohini will tell you that I'm notorious for mixing my metaphors, so I'm going to probably do that today. But the direction that I want to go in now, that if I continue with this theme of it being analogous with computer technology, I like the idea that these neural networks, if they are indeed the software that we write, that these cables eventually line up with this one big giant coaxial cable that leads to the entertainment center of consciousness. So it's probably not escaped your notice at this point that here is the principle of mind, this is the principle of thought, and now here is the principle of consciousness. So at this point, I would ask my audience, do you go on Netflix? And generally they all say, yes, I go on Netflix. Like, who doesn't go on Netflix during this period that we find ourselves in? So on Netflix, when you go on Netflix, there's this little feature where if you are watching a movie or a show one day and you have to stop for whatever reason, you can resume the following day. And there's this little feature at the bottom of the screen where you can scroll your cursor and you can find the scene that you were watching yesterday. And basically what happens is this little feature crops up at the bottom of the screen. All the scenes pop up and you scroll through it until you find your scene, click play, and the scene expands, and there you go. There's your show, your movie. I'm going to say, can you see? Yes, you can. I'm going to say that this little cursor here is that's kind of how the ego works and operates. So if you think of it on those terms, the movie that we press play on is always going to be a reflection of our state of mind, which is fine if we're in a happy, lovely mood. Probably the movie that we're going to press play on is going to probably be something that's going to be nice and joyous. Conversely, and this is where where it's important, when we get into a low mood, if we're in a low state of mind, this picture is probably going to look something like this. And that is a problem if it starts to get to a place where this low mood, based on the biology of thought, based on the fact that we are creatures of habit, and we will constantly find ourselves getting into this loop of thought, guess what? This gets into a loop as well. So we find ourselves getting into this loop of thought, getting into this sort of constant need to sort of, I want to use a word called narratize, but I don't think it's an actual word, but it's almost like it would fit the bill here. But we are constantly we're constantly narrating our lives with this narration, this script that we wrote, this narrative that we created gets into this loop form based on our state of mind. And because of the habitual nature of thought, you start to see how that can become an identity. So I'm going to change tracks a little bit here. And I know there are people on this call who probably heard me say this 1,000 times, but it's one of my favorite Einstein quotes. So there is an Einstein quote where it's purported for him to have said that the intuitive mind, and I'm going to say the intuitive mind is akin to this place up here, this field. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a willing servant. And yet we've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So this is Einstein, arguably one of the greatest minds of our time, who's basically saying, yeah, E equals mc squared. That didn't come from here. That came from here. That came from this field. So in terms of this illustration, on those terms, if we kind of consider that for the most part, that's what society is doing, it's kind of putting all its stock and value in the analytical mind. On those terms, generally what society looks like for the most part is that we kind of put ourselves in this box. And all of our identification is based on the Netflix movie that is based on our state of mind. So in that box, and with a general separation from this field, I would say it's not so much a box as a prison. So I'm not going to draw a whole bunch of lines through my drawing. But basically what is happening is we can't create this prison through identification with this Netflix movie. So when I am doing this illustration, generally there's always some bright spark in the audience. It's like, oh, that's all very well and good. I understand that. But how do I get back up here? If this is the sweet spot, how do I get out of my Netflix movie? So they are asking me that. They're asking me that from the analytical mind, basically wanting a magic bullet, basically wanting a process or a technique. So I have to say, you know, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There are no techniques that I can think of. I mean, I think there are maybe one or two things that, you know, on a personal level, you might be helpful. But for me, this is all about awareness. This is not about a technique or a process. It's about an awareness. So if I'm actually going to try and distill that idea into this illustration, I would say to them that kind of really where you want to be is to position yourself somewhere, maybe let's say here, where you're in a place of an observing your state of mind and knowing that this is always a reflection and understanding that you don't have to take this so seriously because this was always an illusion. This was just a narrative that you created at some point based on your state of mind. If you can really position yourself here, then you're going to go a long way to recovery. So if I'm talking to the residents at a treatment center, I will say to them that where they find themselves at this point in their life, in this box, in this prison, is they've got so identified with this story that in their innocence, alcohol and whatever drug du jour was available to them, that became a reprieve from this experience. So generally, what people are dealing with, can get so kind of terrified and unhappy in this experience that they're looking for a way out. And I'm saying that the way out is to sort of, in a sense, is just move yourself to a position, to higher ground, as it were, and be more of an observer rather than the person that's caught up in this identification. Do I still have time, or did you want to step in at this point? No,
that's fine.
Because I think there's just one way that I really like to sort of anchor this.
Go ahead.
So that I have to tell a little story. So you'll probably think I'm waffling on here, but so and I do like to mix my metaphors, you know that. But there's this one metaphor which always kind of gets them, and I find that I really enjoy sharing this. But there's a Netflix documentary, and I'm sure some of you have seen it. It's called The Social Dilemma. And I remember watching that documentary and feeling very disturbed about the message in it. And to sort of paraphrase it as much as possible, it was probably a lot of whistleblowers who are being interviewed trying to sort of give people an understanding of the sinister nature of the way that social media is set up to sort of create division, create algorithms. I think in the wake of Cambridge Analytica, that was probably the backdrop of it. So there was a strong suggestion that the way that they create algorithms is a way to manipulate their audience. In fact, they don't call them the audience; they call them the users. I think one of them said that there are only two institutions that refer to their customer base as users, and she said one was social media and one was alcohol. So that was quite interesting in itself. But anyway, I was watching this documentary, and just as an aside, and just because my mind has a tendency to wander, I was thinking to myself, well, I don't really go on social media in the way that I used to. It's kind of like now we use it, it's more of we run programs on social media. So it's not like I'm watching silly cat videos anymore. I'm not looking at it as a means of entertainment. And I thought to myself, well, it's kind of sad because I used to enjoy those silly cat videos. I did watch the odd silly cat video. I don't want to paint this picture of me as a cat video person, but let's use that as an example. But it was funny. My kids got on TikTok. Literally, I think it was like the next day or so after watching this documentary. And I don't know, because it may have cropped up in conversation. The kids were talking about TikTok, and my eldest daughter downloaded the app onto my phone. And lo and behold, I got on TikTok, and lo and behold, there are the silly cat videos again. And I'm finding myself somewhat entertained by it. Sort of mindless fun. And then at one point in my feed, this fishing video came up. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll watch that. If that's any good, I'll send it to my brother in London. And I love my brother, and I look for ways to connect with him. So I thought, oh, I'll watch this fishing video. So I watched this fishing video. There's a guy in a boat, the rod bends over double. You expect some behemoth to come up from the depths. So I watched the whole fishing video. No fish ends up in the boat, which is really frustrating. But being the monk that I am, I then watch another fishing video and then another one. And what I haven't realized is that the TikTok gods that are up there in the Ethernet world have figured out, he's watched a fishing video. We'll send him another one. So by the end of the week, my whole feed is fishing videos. I don't even like frigging fishing, but my whole feed is fishing videos. But my whole point, and to use this example, is that's based on how the mind works. The guys in that world, the men and women in that world, are using this idea based on, really, for me, how the mind works and operates. So in a sense, it's like, this is what's going on here. It's like my whole feed, my whole way of creating algorithms through the processing system of thought, through the neural networks, through the neural biology. The neural biology works like an algorithm. So if I get into a low mood and I look at that low mood, I look at the narrative around that low mood, guess what? That gets into my feed and eventually becomes a loop. So in the same way, for me, in terms of TikTok and that fishing video, the only way to get that out of my feed was to stop looking at those fishing videos. So I just like to use that as an example of how the mind works and operates, and just to use this as a way to sort of describe the principles of mind, principle of thought, principle of consciousness. And for whatever reason, this has been landing really well at the treatment center. And now we kind of use it as a model most of the time too. It's like, let's get this one out the way as quickly as possible. But I have found that this is, for me, it's been the most effective way to talk about this understanding in terms of like, what are the principles? Here they are. And I'm very much a visual person, so this has been helpful for me. So without further ado, I've spoken for a long time.
Thank you, Angus.
It's also really funny as I'm sitting here listening to you, Angus. Our eldest daughter complains when Angus is doing things in this room because her bedroom is across the way. And she says how loud you are. I'm allowed to do early morning webinars up here. He's not. And I know I understand. My ears are ringing.
I guess I go a few octaves higher than you normally. Yeah.
You might have to turn up your volume now when I'm speaking.
I should have a muffler.
Anyway, no, I didn't mean to take away from what you did. It was beautiful. And so I think what's important is that, you know, whatever way you want to talk about the principles is what works. Like, this is the way that Angus has found that is really effective for him. And he, like he said, he's visual. And so that makes a lot of sense. If I were to talk about them, I probably wouldn't do it with a drawing. I would probably do it with words. And when I was thinking about what to share today with all of you, what really came up for me was to remember that the principles are the way that Sydney Banks and the people that he developed and trained, the way that they found to point towards what's true. And so the principles are you. They're not something separate than you. They're just a way of pointing to the truth of who you are, the truth of your beingness. And it's really easy to, I think it's a Zen, I don't know if the Buddha said it, or I know a lot of Zen teachers talk about this, that the finger pointing at the moon, don't stare at the finger, look at what it's pointing to. And so I really want to remind everyone that you know this is you, and only your experience is going to be able to speak truth to you. And hopefully Angus's drawing and all the other ways that it gets pointed to is helpful. But ultimately, it's your lived experience, it's your inner knowing, that is your teacher, that is your guide. And that's what these three principles are pointing to. They're pointing to that this is within you. And I was speaking with someone on a webinar yesterday, and they asked me, because Angus and I talk a lot about our essential nature being love, and how we can, in the rewilding metaphor that we use, how we can be rewilded back to our natural state of love. And they asked me, well, how do you know your natural state is love? And all I could say is that that's my experience when my mind really quiets and I'm in that space of connected with mind, or whatever you want to call that, one of the qualities that I find the best way to talk about that is an experience of love. And it's a felt experience. And that's the best evidence that I could give. I couldn't give anything else. And so I said, you know, really, you have to look and see what your experience is. What is your felt experience around that? And does that feel true to you? And it might not, I don't know. But I can only share with you what really makes sense based on what occurs to me, based on my inner knowing. And we talked about the difference between how we have what Angus is talking about, like all of the narrative, the story, the conditioning, you know, what we might call the taming that happens to us as we go through life, that is our inner narrative that comes up over and over and over again. But then we also have a deeper knowing within us that feels different. In another example, I was speaking with someone and we were talking about feeling good enough, feeling worthy. And when we were talking about other people, it was really obvious that everyone is on an even playing field there. Like, people are worthy because they are worthy. Their beingness is enough. When they look at their child, they're not thinking their child is unworthy. And yet, when they were thinking about themselves, they were listening to the narrative of unworthiness. And so I asked them, I said, well, how do you know that these other people are worthy, or that your child is worthy? Like, how do you know that? And again, it's like, they just knew. And we know that for ourselves too, but we sometimes just get caught up in the conditioning, in the stories that we've told ourselves, that we bought into over the years, and we just forget what we know. And so the principles are a way of helping us remember what we know. They're a way of reminding us who we are. They're a beautiful explanation of where our experience comes from. I think they really, in a really simple way, help us understand that what we experience comes from the inside, that we don't experience life directly, we experience our thinking about life, and that the quality of our thinking determines what our experience is moment to moment. And it points to a deeper knowing within us. It points to that, that deeper intelligence that is who we are. And we get to, as Angus said, have that experience of identifying less with the stories we've created, so we can hear and feel more in terms of what's beyond that. And one of the things that has been occurring to me lately, and it's fairly recent, so I don't know exactly how well I'm going to be able to put it into words, but as I was looking at all of this and looking at how Angus talks about this, one of the other metaphors that people will often use is the metaphor of being the witness, and putting that together with like when we go to the movies. So if you know you're watching a movie, then you can enjoy the movie. You can have all the emotions that come up for you as you're watching the movie, but it's not as terrifying as if you're living the movie. And Angus and I had a little, I don't know that it would be a tiff. It was just a moment where there was some friction between us, but I think I had a really nice insight out of it, so I'll share it. But we were watching the show this weekend, and we ended up, we'd been watching it as a series, and so we ended up somehow watching one of the episodes and missing an episode and skipping ahead. And I was more impacted by this than Angus was. I was more disappointed that we'd missed this part, because I felt like because we were going to watch the episode that we missed, that I wouldn't enjoy it as much because I knew what was going to happen. So it would kind of spoil it for me. Angus was less bothered by that. What's so funny?
Well, because one character, we just suddenly realized that one character had gone missing altogether.
We didn't know what had happened. So anyway, so we kind of knew it was going to happen on several levels. And then as I was sort of expressing my disappointment around this, Angus, I could see he was kind of quizzical. He couldn't see why it was so important to me. And then he's like, oh yeah, you don't like me talking to you when you're watching a show. And I'm like, no, I don't like you talking to me when I'm watching a show. And he's like, you really get into it. I'm like, yeah, I do. I really get into it. And like, you'll pick up a book. I haven't done this recently, but you'll pick up a book and you won't put it down and you'll stay up late reading the book. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. And so I really get into a story, and I really immerse myself in it, and I really enjoy it. But I never forget that and think I'm a character in the book, or think I'm a character in the story, but yet I can still really enjoy it and get into it. So we were able to watch that episode and it was fine. I got over it. But what I realized is that in that metaphor of, when I was thinking previously of that metaphor of being in the audience watching a movie, it felt somewhat removed to me. It felt, didn't really like it, because I don't like it. It felt very separate, dual in a sense. And I realized that no, it's actually through being in life that we get to experience more of who we are, while knowing that we're not just this experience of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Knowing that we're more than that actually allows us, and it allows me, to be in the lived experience of life more fully, because I'm less afraid of it. I'm less resistant to the full experience. And that was one of the big insights I had when I came into this understanding, that was so freeing for me, that I don't know if you ever still get sometimes, because I thought that I just wanted to be happier more of the time. And I'm not going to say that I'm not happier more of the time. I definitely am. But I was seeking happiness. And I thought, when I came into this understanding, that, oh, here's another way for me to find out how to be happier more of the time. And this is going to be the thing that shows me that. And I think it wasn't just happier more of the time. I think it was more happy all the time. I think that's what I was really thinking. I was signing up for, oh, here's a way that I can be happy all the time. And what I didn't realize in that outlook is that in my desire and seeking to be happy all the time. The only reason that I had that desire was because I was scared of certain experiences that I would have that weren't happiness. I was scared of my anger. I was scared of my sadness. I was scared of my insecurity. I was scared of my fear. And so because I was scared of those experiences, I didn't want to experience them. And I thought, well, let's find a way where I get to have a human experience and I don't get to experience them. But what that did is that was restricting, and it was exhausting, and it was all about trying to manage and manipulate. Talk about social media algorithms. I was trying to manage and manipulate my experience and figure out, how do I not have these things that I don't like, these experiences that I don't like? And of course, in my resistance to them, I would only feed it. I would only give them more power, more presence in my life. And so a big shift that happened for me was realizing that through understanding how it works, kind of like what Angus is showing us all here, just understanding a little bit about that. I don't understand a lot about that, but understanding a little bit about that, it really allowed me to not be afraid of my experience, which is one of Sydney Banks' most famous quotes. If we only knew not to be afraid of our experience, that would be enough to change the world. And it changed my world. It changed my capacity to be in my human experience more fully. And so rather than spirituality being something where I transcend my human emotions and, in a sense, disconnect from them. I don't know what I was thinking I was going to be doing. And what I saw was like, no, this understanding allows me to feel it all, the full range, and not be scared. And that was freedom. That is freedom.
Not right.
And I'm not, sorry. And I'm not going to say that I don't get scared at times. I still do. It's definitely a growing edge, but I have so much more freedom than I used to have in terms of being human and what that feels like. And that made life a whole lot more rich and juicy and fun. And I see now that what it allowed was through the aliveness of that, through the lack of restraint on my trying to manage and control my human experience, it's through my human experience that I wake up more to the fuller picture of all of who I am. Just like when I'm watching a movie where a character might die. We realize that, like, I might feel,
without you knowing,
I might feel the pain and the sadness of that, but it wakes me up more to all of who I am in the experience of that. I don't need to escape the human experience. It's actually through it, in it, because of it, that I get to deepen in my knowing of what's beyond thought, feeling, and behavior. And so that, I think, is really part of what was behind the rewilding metaphor that Angus and I use now, where rewilding is a term that's used in nature conservation to show how nature can be rewilded back to its natural state. And there's lots of beautiful examples of that. One is the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone Park. But when Angus and I were looking at that, and there's a video that's a beautiful video about that, we also saw the metaphor and the parallel of how we can be rewilded back to our natural state. And that's the state that's pre the narrative, pre the conditioning. And that it doesn't mean we get rid of all of our conditioning, but we can be looking in the direction of what's beyond that. And we can experience the aliveness that's there, the aliveness that you see in young children who do not have a care in the world about how they come across. They have their feelings that move through them so beautifully, happy 1 second, angry 1 second. Like there's just a fluidity of movement within them of that emotion, and they're not worried about that. And again, I'm not saying that we all want to be throwing tantrums and just letting it all hang out in that way. There is the capacity to be kind and thoughtful. But there's something about how we can let go of the conditioning and not identify with the conditioning that restricts us from the aliveness that's within us, from that vital essence that is who we are, from that fire of ourself that is always a light and doesn't go out and that doesn't change. And that, yes, our thoughts and feelings are constantly moving and changing through us, but there's also the awareness that doesn't change. There's also the aliveness that's there no matter what. There's also that ability to witness that is constant and consistent. And that when we have the awareness of our awareness, and when we identify more with that and less with all of the thoughts and feelings that come and go, it doesn't mean that we don't feel. It means that we get to feel more richly, but with less suffering. And so for me, that's not really a description of the principles. Angus did that part, hopefully, but that's one of the things that really has impacted me about this understanding and continues to. And it just deepens and continues to unfold, as I'm sure all of you experience as well. And so I know, this is a conversation, or at least I'm hoping it's a conversation. So Kelly, if it feels like it's a good time to open it up to the group, we'd love to hear from them,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So any reflections about what we've shared so far? We'd love to hear those. Any insights that you've had? We'd love to hear that. Any questions you have for us? We're here to be of service to you. So whatever's present.
Thank you, guys. That was beautiful. I picked up a few beautiful tokens from both of you. And I said right before you began, Angus, that I just love this because I feel visual too. I see that visual. And then the impact of slowing in the words, Rohini's, actually allows me to become more present in the room. So thank you both for that. That was beautiful. So we have till 10:30. Do you guys have the same, or are you on a?
Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to open up the room to insights or questions or anything that might be popping in for anyone who would like to share. Pamela Doherty and myself are here to support the room, so please feel free to just raise your hand or come off of mute. And I also know sometimes there's stillness that promotes the awareness, so we'll just sit and see what shows up.
Yeah. It's lovely that you have so many people on the call. I'm going to scroll through the screens while we're waiting.
Yeah.
My goodness, yeah. And we always have stuff to say too. So
yes.
If you're a shy bunch this morning, it's like, yeah, we can carry on.
Well, I have to say that this morning was.
Martine raised her hand.
Please.
Hi, Rohini. Hi, Angus.
Hi, Martine.
I'm probably one of the 3 people in the world that doesn't have Netflix. But I really liked that way of explaining, the feed, that the algorithms, and I probably will steal that.
Yeah, please do.
And no, I really like that way of explaining that metaphor, because it makes it so real to people and easy to understand.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Hey, you're so welcome.
Thanks, Martine. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's funny because at that point, literally around that time when I saw that documentary, it's amazing how so many things lined up in a very sort of synchronistic way, where I suddenly had clients from that world. And I had one client in particular who was pretty high up in the social media world, who was also very disillusioned and left it, and really gave me an education about, the way that you do create these algorithms and how it is used as a tool of manipulation. And then on top of that, I had a couple of young clients who were gamers. People, and I never even knew this, people would pay them to watch them play these computer games, which is a whole other world that was opened up to me. And it's almost like I wanted to change my whole metaphor, because in a sense, it's like, what started to unfold, and particularly with a conversation which I had with a person who was pretty high up in that social media world, she talked about the gamification of culture. And so the institution that she worked for was kind of based on a computer game in so many ways, where there are these different levels. So I don't know if you're familiar with gaming technology. I am now, I never was. But
the beauty you have to have sons. So
that's right, exactly. So, you know, it's based on you go up in levels. So you have like a, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3. So in this particular institution, each level came with this incredible prize. You know, there was always something to sort of like aspire to. When I get to level 2 in this organization, I will be rewarded in this really incredible way. So they keep tantalizing you and keep wanting you to push for that next higher level. So I started to think about, you know, in terms of my model, I could actually change it so this becomes a computer game. So life is one big glorious computer game. And for me, if it were to be a game, the purpose of the exercise would be to grow and evolve in consciousness. So I'm constantly looking for ways to upgrade and grow in consciousness. Now, the thing where I love this idea of a metaphor, if I'm really looking at what I do and what I teach and how I coach people, well, I love what you said, and I can't remember what you said, is like something about, you know, this sort of beautiful field within us. It's like I'm trying to reacquaint people with this GPS system. This is the guiding force that will help you negotiate through the computer game of life. So if this were the computer game, it's like, yeah, in the game of life, wouldn't life be really boring if there were no challenges? In a sense, it's like, I saw someone talk about this recently, and they showed, you know, how life is kind of a little bit similar to a computer game. We generally want our life to be like, and he shows 2 illustrations. He shows one illustration where there's a steep hill and there's a flag at the top of it, and then there's a little person at the bottom of it. And he said, generally, we'd probably want life to look like that. We've got to walk up this hill. But in reality, and he shows a second illustration, there's a steep hill, and there's a flag at the top of it, the man at the bottom. They're like, there's a lake with alligators in it. And then there's this sort of like, you know, there's a fire pit. There's all sorts of challenges to go through. And that is basically, you know, life would be boring. How would we evolve and grow if we weren't faced with challenges? So in a sense, to me, it's kind of like, yeah, I love that idea and I love that model, but it's like, it's so nice to think, yeah, these are all opportunities for me to grow and evolve in consciousness. And all along, my greatest resource is going to be my intuitive mind. So Einstein had it right. In this diagram where I've kind of created a box around the analytical machinery and the accompanying Netflix movie, for me, and this is how I kind of like to talk about the ego is kind of like the eye of the analytical mind, which under these terms is like, there's a bit of a God complex going on. The ego is like, whoa, I'm going to like do life separate from this field here. I'm going to do life on my terms. And that always leads to suffering. The ego for me is like, I don't want to demonize the ego. I think the ego doing its proper job is going to sit in the back seat and be an observer. I don't want it to be at the wheel. I want to be, in a sense, it's like, I want my higher self to be at the wheel where I'm actually listening to this GPS system and following those prompts. And great that I have this analytical machinery to figure things out and put form on. I was like, I don't know how else I would be able to play the game of life without it. It's a really important part of my equipment, but the ego does not need to be in charge on that level. I want the ego to be kind of following the prompts of this GPS system, my intuitive mind. So for me, the work and the nature of the work is to help clients come back to that natural state. And that for me is why the rewilding metaphor I feel is so appropriate, is that we're really trying to sort of help our clients, in a sense, come back up here and know which side their bread is buttered, and know that this is always trying to create a situation of balance and harmony. Excuse me. The very nature of this universe is looking for balance and harmony. That's the trajectory of evolution, balance and harmony, looking for the most optimal way for a life form to have an experience. So if I follow that trajectory, yeah, I'm actually following, you know, the principles of life. And for me, that starts here. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat this morning. Probably means I've talked enough.
Do you have water?
I do have some tea. I'll take a sip of tea.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Martine, for asking that question. Great to see you as well.
Yeah.
Julian, please. Julian has something to say. And Chev, good to see you.
Hi, Julian.
So the thing that I find interesting between what you both said is that little guy off to the side, right?
Yeah.
So he's the guy that chooses the film we're going to watch on Netflix, or decides not to watch it, or can search the feed to see what else there is, and so that seems to me, when Rohini, you were talking about not getting too lost in the film, that seems to me to be the optimum place to be. Although at one level it could seem like you're dissociating from, I think that's what you were talking about, Rohini, dissociating yourselves from life, and we don't do that, do we? There are times when we get totally drawn into it and so on. It's the ability to sort of step back, or even have a glimpse that you can step back. And then the second thing with that is that person, that little fella on the side, is always okay.
Yeah.
He's always okay.
Yeah.
And that's huge. Just much more peaceful way, or contented way of living life, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up, because actually before my throat's got a frog in it, where that new metaphor for me ultimately would take me to is if in a sense it's like I can suggest that this will be my computer game. This is the game of life. Ideally, I want to position myself here. I want to be the gamer. I don't want to be the avatar. And generally, I think in the way that we're talking about it, and certainly in that Einstein model, is like, yeah, we think we're the avatar. We think we are the computer game. We think that the character that we're playing in the computer game, this position here, I become the gamer rather than the avatar. And this idea is like, yeah, I'm not Super Mario. I'm the person with the controls. And on that level, then that's a much better advantage point for me to do live. But people get lost in the game, and that becomes their identification. And it's kind of sad, and in the work that I do at the treatment centers, like quite often, people come away with a label. This is who you are based on this Netflix movie. In a sense, it's like, and I know I can say this because Bill Pettit would probably talk about it, maybe not in these terms, but is the DSM-5 or whatever we're at now, the DSM-5 is like, that's where we find the label to give the Netflix movie. It's like, this is how we identify the narrative in the Netflix movie. But this for me is a sweet spot. It's about being the observer, being the gamer, rather than, be the character in the matrix, as it were.
Yeah, it's beautiful observations. Mm-hmm. And that's where we get to see that it's just understanding. Like, that is true for all of us. We all are the gamer, the observer, like that's happening whether we know it or not. But understanding that in an experiential way really does a lot for us, because it means that we can be in the experience of life in as Julian's saying, in a more contented, gentle way. And even when life is difficult, it's easier. Go ahead.
Can I just say that so I've been knowledgeable about the principles, or known it since, for 11 years, let's say 12 maybe. And it just seems to me that it's got easier to be in that place as time's gone on. So my understanding, or my
awareness,
my sense of that little fella on the side has got greater as time has gone on. Which means that any situation can occur, I'll still get drawn into it, and I'll still be, Siobhan will tell you how I can get agitated and all those kind of things. And like, I can do stupid things in my life, and, because I'm in that movie. That is but then I more quickly, I kind of step back into, oh, actually, I can just press hold on this game and go away and make a cup of tea, or, and then I can come back to it and I can have a new game, you know?
Yeah.
So the more that's one of the real boons of this, is the more I'm in it, the more understanding I have. And it generally, it dips, but it comes back, and it comes back better. It's my feeling. It comes back better than it was before.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to flog this metaphor to death, but
You and me both.
in a sense, it's like when I first was introduced to this understanding, I would find myself kind of falling down, getting caught up, and then I would really judge myself and beat myself up. And I'd be like, oh God, this is another new philosophy that doesn't work. And then I started to realize it's the bounce back. That's what's important. So in a sense, it's like, I'm not, I remember playing Super Mario a little bit in the 80s when it first came out. And then I realized that there were these levels. But what I realized, and I kind of did get addicted for a while, and I get really frustrated because I would get to, let's say, level 2, and then I would fall down, make a mistake, and oh gosh, I have to go straight back to the beginning. And in a sense, it's like, that's kind of like where it is now for me, is like, I fall down, but I know the way back to level 2 really quickly. I fall down at level 3. I know the way back to level 3 really quickly. And that's all that matters. There's my resilience. There's my bounce back. And that's what's important. So I don't get nearly so judgmental about myself in the way that I would used to. And I think that was just an old habit. I beat myself up because it's like, oh, this doesn't work either. In actual fact, it's really working well. And I'm just getting better at doing life. And that's just how it is. And then lo and behold, I have this GPS system, my intuition, that is a resource for me to help me get through it.
I have to say, I completely agree. And I love the fact that Julian said, I sometimes see myself sitting on the side, as that person, as the picture, and going up, down, up, down, up, down, and being, and I'm sure everybody in the room has been in that place where, take out the bat, didn't get it this time, try again, and the beautiful thing about being a part of the community of the principles in the conversation is that all I get is a better view of what's happening above me in the greater mind of things. I just continue to see more, and less I'm participating in that, you had said getting into the avatar and the label of it, less I label myself. And more I'm seeing that there's just this feeling, this beautiful feeling that says, wow, look at that. And then it's like, right you are.
Yeah.
and I move on rather than going into the conversation that was patterned around self-abuse or self-labeling, and oh, you didn't get it. And I think the beginners of looking at this understanding come to my classes and other people's classes saying, I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. I'm not getting this. And, they'll read books and they'll be sharing in the room and they'll be like, yeah, no. And I remember Sid saying, everybody in this room, in this big convention, everybody in this room, whoever understands me, raise your hand. And everybody just put their hand, but one person understood them and they argued with him the whole weekend. So yeah, I love that part where we're just seeing more and letting go of what, of the habit of thinking we didn't get it right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how powerful something can be when we don't understand it, right? That we can still have our lives impacted and not really get it. Our intellect is never going to be able to grasp the mystery of what we're pointing to, but yet just looking in that direction, having glimpses of something can just be so profound. Mm-hmm. I know Julian has his hand raised again, but it was reminding me of a story of our younger daughter where it was in 6th grade, she was having a hard time and she would have these really bad nightmares, and she would come and sleep with us when she would have these nightmares. And it was one of those things where it was happening for a long time, like, oh boy, what's going to happen here? And then it stopped. And after a while, when it had stopped, I had a conversation with her And I asked her, I said, what happened with your nightmares? Because I know they used to really scare you. Are you still having them and just not coming into our bed, or, what's going on? And she goes, oh, well, I realized when I was having the nightmare that I could just wake myself up. I'm like, that's pretty profound.
Wow.
And so she still would have them, but she would have the understanding that she was having a nightmare and that she could wake herself up. And so she would just wake herself up out of it and then go back to sleep. And isn't that all we're doing in life all the time? We get into a thought nightmare and then we realize that we can wake up from it and not be in it. So it's just like, wow, that's profound.
That's beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. And at the ages in which they can see. So that's beautiful. Go ahead, Julian.
Hi, it's actually me, Siobhan.
Oh, hi.
Hi. This is really beautiful. I just want to say thank you. This is blowing me away, actually. There's something when I have my thought nightmares, I love that term, that I'm seeing more and more is really helpful. And I think Phil Pettit often talks about getting still. We're kind of the only beings on the planet tend to speed up when things aren't going great, whereas most creatures kind of cool down.
Right.
And I'm really, really, really crap at that. I do that a lot. But what I am noticing more and more is that I'm getting better at slowing down and getting still. And it's I feel quite emotional just saying it. I've been really touched by so much of what you said, but just as a tenderness, there's like a really pure space that is it's sort of kind of, it feels a bit to me like it's almost a doorway to getting out of what I believe myself to be and connecting with who I truly am. And I often find it quite moving.
Yeah.
And it's a deeply rich, nourishing space. And it's really hard to put words to it, but it's a beautiful space. I just wondered if that made any sense to you guys, really.
Absolutely. And even though it's hard to put words to it, as you're sharing, I can feel what you're talking about, and that vulnerability and that tenderness. And so often when we open up to that space, emotion comes forward, we kind of get filled up. And as you said, nourished and resourced by that, and tears come, or laughter comes, or even sadness can come, but there's that bittersweetness to it. And I feel it's just such a healing space within us, and that we don't even need to know what's being healed or what's being released. It's like it's just happening, and we don't need to worry about it, and we can just be grateful. So that's really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've been listening to your rewilding. I've been listening to you guys for I think about over a year when I first heard about you, and there is something about the way you guys talk about this stuff that takes me to that place. And I just want to say deep gratitude for that, truly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting that there is just, we all kind of feel the flow and the gravitational pull of that place. And I guess, I don't know, are we the only creatures on the planet that have a sort of egoic, rational mind that seems to want to swim against that current? And every now and again, we just let go of the controls and we find ourselves in that space. And yes, so much of the conversation is like, how do we slow down? How do we settle our minds? Yeah, maybe there are some techniques around that, but there's still nevertheless this obvious fact that when we do let go, we find that sweet spot. And that's where ultimately, I guess we'd like to be, but we still got to do life. And that's just how it is. But we have a tendency to take life so seriously.
Yeah.
And all along there was this backdrop is like, you know what, you're okay. It always makes me laugh in a sense, because I think every now and again I'll do a program or I'll teach a group of people at the treatment center, for argument's sake. It's like every now and again you get someone in the audience and they'll just sort of sit up and say, oh, I'm okay. Gosh, I'm actually okay. And you're like, and everyone's looking at it, it's like, I want that Kool-Aid. What are they, what are they smoking? It's like, what's going on? And you kind of know, it's just like, yeah, they've kind of like, they fell into that sweet spot.
Yeah.
And that's, people have insights there that are just so beautiful. And And I always, that I went through a long period, even teaching this understanding was like, I haven't got there. How did they do that? My ego's like, I need to package that up and figure this out and teach that. But it's so not a sort of an intellectual experience, is it? It's just, you fall into it through the grace, I guess through the grace of God. I don't know.
Yeah, and the lovely reminder that you already said, which is we're always there, except for the Netflix thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
It's beautiful.
You had mentioned deepening the knowing what's beyond thought and behavior. I think that conversation around, behavior and labeling is such a beautiful conversation. Taking the name off of our humanness, removing that place where, as you say, rewilding the experience in our humanness, who we really are. And that really hit me.
Yeah, and seeing the health in it, like seeing the health in whatever's showing up. It is coming from our true nature. It is for us. It is not against us. And when we look at how nature unfolds, it's not always looking beautiful and pretty, but it's all part of that one intelligence moving to greater health and harmony and balance. And yet we can be so hard on ourselves, especially regarding whatever coping mechanisms we might be using. And I'm not just talking about addiction, I'm talking about thought habits, I'm talking about working too hard, like all different ways that we try to manage our experience because it looks a bit scary to us or a lot scary to us. And yet we pathologize that. And then we look at, how do I improve that? How do I work on myself so I don't do that? How do I change myself so that I don't feel insecure? And that was one of mine. And it just makes it all wrong and makes it look bad. And we forget that it's all part of the unfolding. And that's how we're learning and growing. And often again, like, our kids are some of our best teachers with this understanding. And one of the things that I had to learn was that I had these ideas about what was healthy. And so it wasn't healthy to isolate in your room, and it was healthy to eat dinner as a family, and it wasn't healthy to, I think pretty much isolating in your room is one of the things I thought was unhealthy. And yet with this understanding, I could see, like, that's my child listening to her wisdom and taking care of herself. And even though it looks like she's suffering more to me because she's stuck with her thinking in her room, that was her inner guidance saying, do that. And who am I to say that that's not the right thing for her to do as part of her learning and growth and finding balance in that place of that space of peace and slowing down. And Siobhan was just saying that is it. And so I was absolutely on the bandwagon of pathologizing my own coping mechanisms and thinking that I needed to improve myself, and to see through sort of the lens of rewilding how that's all part of the whole and all part of the health, just like a fever is part of the health of a human body in terms of finding the highest form of health. Then so are all of these other things too. And I don't want to get rid of my fevers because that's working for me. It's not working against me. I mean, I'm not saying don't take Tylenol if you have a fever. I'm not a doctor, but I'm just using it as a metaphor that it is a representation of health. And so whatever level of understanding we're at, there is going to be thoughts and feelings and behaviors that are in alignment with that level of understanding, but are all part of the unfolding towards greater knowing of who we are. And to see it that way, we can work with it rather than trying to work against ourselves. And usually we work against ourselves through judgment and through control and manipulation. And rather than that, we can really allow ourselves to see what is being revealed to us. And someone might say, well, my addiction is dangerous. I could die. But if they're able to see the health in it, then there's the possibility of opening up what else might work. And so that's not the only way. But when we see just the pathology in that, the lens is so narrow focused that we're not able to necessarily see what other possibilities are there. And so I think this is, you know, I'm sure we're preaching to the choir here in this group, but I think in sort of the wider society, there's this real focus on optimization, on self-improvement, on better is more. And it really misses the point of what is naturally unfolding and seeing the good and the health in that by letting go of our misunderstandings and letting go of our preconceived notions about what things should look like, and allowing ourselves to be with what is and be with the truth of what is, and not just the label, as you're saying, Kelly, of what is, or the judgment of what is, but be with the full truth of what is. And that is powerful.
Mm.
Yeah. And the word curiosity, open that mind up.
Yes.
Curiosity of
Yeah.
potential. Morag, please.
Hi, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Hi, Morag.
Hello, nice to meet you. I do a lot of work with people who are grieving as a hospice volunteer. And it's so interesting how I've come across the principles, I guess, the last 5 or so years, and how simple it's made it. Because I think, I mean, grief is labeled as a mental illness in DSM. And the metaphor I see more and more is people, you know, come either to the group or one-on-one to feel better. They're hurting, they've lost a loved one. And of course, any grief, we as hospice focus on death of a loved one. And the feelings are painful and disorienting and scary and make it better. I don't want to be feeling like this. And the sense, it just clicked to me, is that let go and feel everything. And so any conversation becomes, yes, sadness, yes, tears, of course, getting an understanding of our loved one not in physical form anymore. And then the exploration and the insights, and it just opens so much. And I think that's where I see people really moving to a profound understanding of what it is to be human. They can be with the tsunami can hit them, or it can be a tiny ripple at any point, and it's all okay. And then beneath all that is there's a beautiful John O'Donoghue poem for grief, it's called, and at the very end it says, you know, you learn acquaintance with your loved one and return to the heart of your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. And it's like getting absolutely from that beautiful diagram, getting from this and really allowing all that to go on. We're human. And by taking your hands off, by taking away from the judgment and the fixing and then you get to experience it all. The joy, the love, the laughter, the tears. It's so much simpler. So yeah, beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I love I love the idea of, you know, that grief is kind of it's our psychology doing reparations. It's like it's the intelligence in the system. I love that that metaphor that Chip Chipman shares, where he said that when he was working in Miami, he had this high roller client who had an aeroplane, and he took Chip up one day. And Chip, I think, was at the controls, and he kind of purposely, or I guess his client was at the controls and put the aircraft purposefully into a tailspin. And it's now become sort of one of those iconic metaphors in this community. But Chipman was the source, so he gets to really tell the story beautifully. Let's go of the controls, and the intelligence in the design causes it to stabilize. And we have that intelligence in our own system. It's like, yeah, we are designed to have the most optimal human experience. Everything about our biology is set up that way. And yet we still continue to question it. But when we really get it and like, you know what, I can just surrender. Grief is part of that. It's part of that intelligence. It's coming through me. It's helping me here. But we can get so kind of caught up, you know, I need to compartmentalize it. I need to store it away. I need to fight it. It's like, no, you know, in a sense, it's like you're designed to handle it. Like you say, a tsunami, you're designed to handle it. Your body's equipped to handle this. Your psychology too. I love that.
That's beautiful, the work that you're doing, and the ability to see that spiritual understanding is not about not being in the human experience. And I think that so often I'm absolutely guilty of this, is thinking like, oh, deeper spiritual understanding is going to take me out of the fullness of the human experience. And I'm looking for that. That's what I need. But really what it does is it allows us to see how we are, like exactly as you're saying, we are okay within it. And that we can be with it all, like you're saying, the tsunami, the ripple, whatever that, however that shows up. And as Julia mentioned earlier, the okayness, like that is really, I think, what all spiritual traditions are pointing us toward in all of the different ways that they do that. And yet it's so funny how we forget and we think that it's something else.
I love what Siobhan said about the tenderness. I always say the gentleness of be gentle with ourselves. And that's not a should. It's like when we remember. And we do. Right now, we are in physical form and we get to experience a smorgasbord of experience and everything else. And we're still the spiritual. It's both. It's all. And so, it's it's not a but. It's not this, but not that. It's everything.
Thank you
Lovely.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for your work.
The yes and. I wanted to just add one quick thing before I let Rick comes on. When I was in the retreat with the Pranskys, Linda had a beautiful thing to say around this topic, which was that the humanness of ourselves looks to stabilize. And that stabilization can take many different forms depending on the behaviors and patterns of us as humans. And she was mentioning that and pointing in the direction that the stabilization is already within you. If we look into the mind and we see our potential, see what is already there, that anything outside ourselves, is just an outside-in experience and short-lived. So, that came to mind when you both were sharing. Thank you, Morag. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, thank you. So many different tangents can go here, but thank you, Angus, for that beautiful illustration. And yes, I'm full disclosure, I'm probably going to borrow that.
You won't. Well, I'm thankful, and you won't be the first to. So yeah, please,
I'm sure.
By all means.
I'll kind of recognize it, but we'll.
I'd like to see how it recognizes.
Yeah,
recognizes.
We have a medical term called hemostasis, right? Which is the natural state, naturalness of our bodies to balance ourselves out. And I deal with the emergency responder group, and there's a lot of paradigms around that group. And you talk about labels, right? And where they keep pointing to the problems, right? They keep saying, it's the call volume, it's the no breaks, there's dozens of them, right? And then the whole labeling thing afterwards, your post-traumatic stress and your depression and all those other kind of labels, which appear very real in the moment when they're experiencing them, right? But it's kind of funny how I see responders all of a sudden get a label and get relief from it. It's sort of like, that explains so much now, and it's like, okay, yes, it describes you, but it doesn't have to define you. And that's a direct quote from Carl Jung when, when he basically said, like we've all developed this, whatever you want to call it, you can label yourself introverted, you can label yourself extroverted, right? And yes, you act in those according manner, but that doesn't, it only describes you in that moment. It doesn't define you. You can, we're all over the map, right? One of the paradigms I also that comes in with responders is because we live in a chaotic world in the sense that, it's very, you're bouncing from one thing to another thing to another thing, is the whole notion of this, we understand what mindfulness can do, and we understand that it gets us into a nicer, quieter state, but how does that really work in real-time response? And I point out that it works very well. As a matter of fact, if you get out of the way, it works really, really well. And I've done that in my 30 years as a paramedic. I had you call it the 3 principles, but it was a little different in 1982 for me anyways. And, and when you understand that when I brought myself into the call, things didn't really work well, but when I let go of some of that personal thinking about particularly preparing for the call, preparing for going into it, like you'd be told something, and then right away your ego mind's going, well, what if it's this? What if it's this? What if it's this? Right? And you haven't even been there yet. Right? So your anxious levels are going up, and you get in there. And I've had students who have gone to, chest pain calls and spent 10 minutes trying to put somebody into a chest pain call when they're actually just short of breath. So again, it's that when we let go and allow, and I guess what kind of gets in the way a little bit with some of the other personal thinking is that the intuition, like there's a balance, and I think you alluded to it. There's a balance between your intuition and your teaching. Like we're protocol driven, right? So I had no idea what I was going into the academy. So I learned about the anatomy and how things worked, and, bleeding will eventually stop, kind of a thing. So you kind of learned that part, but there's also an intuitive part that kind of needs to, or somehow marriages, right? But that only happens in real time when you don't, get caught up. And so, I see so much value in bringing this at the academy level, because that's how I thrive through the service, where I've seen others suffer and just survive. I believe I thrive having this understanding going into the work, and not getting in the way of, well, this is really crappy. This is real. Well, is it really? It's like it just, who cares? Kind of a deal. Anyways, I appreciate it. I really love what you guys have been saying, and you guys have got a really great vibe. Thanks.
Thank you. Rick, it's funny. I have a young client who I was actually just talking to this weekend, who is he's studying to become a paramedic in the fire department. And we were having this very conversation about creating the balance between, obviously you have to study for the exams, and obviously you have to get a certain amount of training, but never lose sight of the fact that, your intuition is probably going to be your greatest ally in the field when you have to make, important decisions. You don't have the luxury perhaps of rumination. You've got to make an immediate decision. So it's a really important conversation to have. And it was really, it's kind of, it's synchronistic that, that you come on and share this. And I've literally just had a conversation about this weekend.
And it's, what I point to is flow state, like being in the flow state, right? And, when we have a really high acuity call, where a lot of things are happening, in that moment, after when we get into the debriefing, it's sort of like, well, how did that go? And people would often say, I don't know how we ever got through that.
Right.
right? And it's sort of like, yeah, well, that was our innate wisdom working in conjunction with our training,
Yeah.
getting us through. And when you reflect back on it, there was no mind.
Yeah.
There was nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like, but we did it. We got
Yeah.
through it,
Yeah.
you know? And when you reflect back on the calls that you had the worst time with, how much of that you was in it.
Right.
And you can sort of see I can see, okay, yeah. So the trick is get less of you out of it. Just show up, respond accordingly, because you will.
Yeah. It's like an athlete would call that that's getting in the zone, getting into that flow state.
And it's so important what you're saying, Rick, that access to that intuition or that knowing is available only in the present moment. Like we have to be present to be in that flow state. I'm actually thinking of, we did some couples work, and the husband was an ER physician and had been doing it for a long time. And so he knew how to do this at work day in, day out. He knew to be present. He was unflappable, in ways that would blow our minds. But yet in his relationship, he hadn't put the dots together to see that the very thing that he was just doing intuitively at work that allowed him to be so successful and not get burnt out doing what he was doing, he didn't see how it applied in his relationship. So he would get all caught up in his head.
Yeah, he ran an ER, didn't he?
Yes. So it was actually really easy. You did most of the work with him, but it was really easy because he already knew what to do. He just wasn't seeing how it applied.
Just take it home with you.
Yeah, do take that home with you.
Yeah.
So, but that's beautiful. Thank you. And that's so great that you're, it sounds like you're training in the academy. Is that part of what you're doing?
No, I'm retired now, so I'm working on programs and trying to create relationships to bring it into the
That would be
academy.
great.
Yeah,
Like
amazing. That's wonderful.
Wonderful.
God's
Thanks so
work.
much for
Thank
sharing.
you.
Thanks for sharing, Rick. That was great.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to give you guys the opportunity to share some of the things that you've got coming up, or programs that how people can work with you or join you in your network of community.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think we're really excited about it. Are you excited about the podcast?
I am excited about the podcast.
But if people haven't listened to the Rewilding Love podcast, we would just encourage people to check it out if they feel at all interested. We recorded a couples intensive, and we sort of took excerpts from the work that we did as the intensive and the follow-up sessions and added our commentary to it. And we just thought it would be a great way to hopefully have people learn more about the understanding in a way that was not just educational, but also interesting as well. So that the full season is out now. So people were saying, like, when's the next one coming out? I want to know what happened. So the whole thing's there. And if you're like me and like to binge on things, it's a good thing. So that's one of the ways. And it was really fun to do. Well, it was fun for me. Angus has more of a love-hate
There was some growing pains to it, let us say.
It's not visual. He has to sit and talk. So it's not necessarily using all of his gifts in the best way.
I had to spending an inordinate amount of time in a sound booth sitting down.
But so we just encourage you to check it out or to share it if you know anyone that might benefit from that. And then the other things that we have, we obviously do our one-on-one work. We do relationship intensives, we do one-on-one intensives, but we also have a rewilding community, which is a membership community. And a lot of the people in that community are people that participated in the 29-day rewilding experience that you mentioned. And, for me, it was really, I think for both of us, but for me, I was really looking at how does this understanding touch as many people as possible without there being barriers to it. And obviously for the one-on-one work that we do, one, we can only work with a certain amount of people. Two, it's very expensive for most people or many people to work in that format. And so I thought, can we create a healing community that allows people to deepen in this understanding and really wake up to seeing this more deeply, where there's no real financial barrier. Yes, we have a membership, but we also have a pay what you can option. And it has really been phenomenal to see how healing can happen in a group format. And we also, with the training program, the practitioner training program that I ran this year, we now have one-on-one sessions offered with the practitioners in the membership program. So for me, it's like a new way of working with people, that I see the group energy being very, I mean, just like what you're doing, Kelly, it seems like really profound in terms of people seeing. It's not about Angus and I being these teachers. It's like, it's about all of us learning and growing together and being on the journey together. And having that group consciousness help carry us all forward. So that's one of the other things that we developed over the past year that I'm really thrilled with.
Yeah, I mean, I have been kind of awestruck in watching how that program has unfolded, because, you know, we're all pointing in a specific direction. We're pointing towards this understanding and using this understanding to jolly it along, as it were, but it's coalesced into this really beautiful community that is so supportive and loving. And for me, it's just, yeah, look, there is the essential nature of it. There is that natural state coming out. You know, we are kind of all one in this universal understanding. And at that very core, there is this experience of love. And that's just something that I've really enjoyed watching and witnessing unfold. Is this sort of very loving, supportive, open community.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to say, this has been more than love and a labor of love from the two of you, because the program here that I run is complimentary and open to the public. And the people that I ask, Rohini and Angus and other speakers, do this because they are that love. So I want to thank you for coming here with your love and your intent to support the community. And I'm here to support you and all those in the room. And I also, are you part of the UK conference? Will you be there as well? Okay, so yeah. You can also see them at the UK conference, which is coming up April 25th, 26th, and 27th. So if you'd like to say goodbye and your thank yous and your welcomes, please unmute yourself and send some love their way on this beautiful Women's Day International.
Oh, yes. And we want to thank you, Kelly. It was really beautiful what you put together. So thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
creating the space. It's beautiful.
All the
Bye, everyone.
All the recordings are in the chat.
Thank you.
Recordings for today, and you'll find that link there to go to the Facebook page, and everything that you need to hear, if you need to hear this again, will be there. So thank you all for coming, and have a beautiful International Women's Day.
Thank you,
Thank
Kelly.
you, Kelly. Take care.
Bye.
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 Lots of love.
Lots of love. Miss Pamela, thank you.